And here we observe the Central Germanic lioness in her natural habitat. After roaming for months and sometimes years on her own, they form social and survival units called families. Once formed, the lioness displays this through a look of satisfaction, almost smugness.
Well, thanks, guys. Welcome to this little quick guide we're going to go over. Today, we're covering Lenna. So we're going to try and go over all the stuff you need to know for her, how to use her in combat, and, keys, etc. A lot of it is pretty self-explanatory, but she is somewhat of a complex unit. A lot of moving parts, but, the nice thing is if you use her correctly, you don't have to think about anything. It's very straightforward, and it's very intuitive. So let's get into it, and it's easier to show than it is to tell. So let's hop to it. Look at this smugness, dude. Look at just the aura. So here we're going to have a combat demonstration of kind of how she works. This is going to be a lot easier to explain her abilities than it is just to be reading off her character sheet. So let's take a look at her real quick. The only thing you need to worry about for her passive is that when people apply conductivity, including her, she's going to gain confectants, and then she also generates electric tiles underneath the enemies. So other than that, you can ignore the passive. So in combat, you're going to use her pretty much the same way. It's going to be like the same rotation of skills every single turn. There'll be some slight variation we'll go over, but it should be very straightforward how to use her. So the other thing you need to know about her is that all of her abilities, including her ult, do something special if you have more than 3 confectants when you use them. So this first ability will do extra damage. The second ability, Leap in Pursuit, will give you an extra action. This is very important, as we'll discuss later. And her ultimate will put her in a concealment state, so if there's a teammate nearby, she'll go stealth. She can't be targeted. So every single turn is going to be pretty much use Leaping Pursuit, and then if your ult is up, use your ult. If not, use Wild Extinction. It's really that easy. And all the parts of her kit will kind of just mesh together into a perfect harmonistic synergy. But let's talk about Leaping Pursuit here. There are a couple restrictions on this. So you do like a jump, but it's not actually a jump. There are some restrictions. You can't go over full cover like this. So tall pieces of terrain can't cover. You also can't go up elevations, weirdly enough. You would think by the name that you can jump up, but you can't. It's more of a dash than it is a jump. You still can go over short pieces of terrain, and even full square short pieces of terrain. You just, like I said, can't go over tall ones, can't go up elevations. So where you land determines where your attack is based off of. So you're going to attack the closest enemy, and you're going to apply stability loss 2 there. This is a very strong debuff that makes them take a ton of extra stability damage, which inside the electric team is important, but even outside the electric team, it's pretty important. So pick a square. It'll target the closest enemy based on where you land. So for example, if I was to pick here, he's the closest if I land here, but he's the closest if I land over here or even here. So make sure you're landing closest to the enemy you want to apply this with. You'll do a small attack on them. There's also some line of sight stuff you need to. So this is also where the line of sight will be based off of. So for example, if you're trying to attack someone right here and you couldn't see them, it wouldn't work. But then after that, since she had 3 confectants when we use that skill, she's going to get her bonus action. And once again, if your ult is up, use it. Even if you can't hit a lot of people, because the value of the ult more so is about the buffs that it applies to the team and to herself. This guy's paralyzed, he can't attack, he will just stare menacingly at us. And then rinse and repeat. From here on out, it's going to be Leap and then Wild Extinction. Now, the only thing you need to keep track of when you're playing her is before you use the Leap, you have to make sure you have 3 confectants. If you do not, it will end her turn after the Leap, and you do not want to do that. So, for example, if you're in, let's say we started this turn with 2 or 1 confectants, we would just skip the Leap, unfortunately, and we would just use one of her other attacks, specifically Wild Extinction, because her ult should be off cooldown. But we're good. We have 3 confectants, so we'll Leap. It'll do, like I said, small attack based on the closest, which right now will be that guy based on where we're landing. And I wanted to land on this because just like most other abilities that let you do extra commands, you can still activate things. You can't move anymore, But you can still do, like, so for example, if you landed on a switch or something, you could activate that. And then we'll just do an ability like this. So, and that's it. That's literally her whole rotation. All the other weirdness of her kit will just kind of even itself out. We'll talk about her segments in a minute here, but that's it. That's literally how you play her. From here on out, it's literally just leap somewhere. I said make sure you had 3 confectants before you do that, and then just use Wild Extinction on somebody, and rinse and repeat. Eventually, they'll get some jankiness, depending on your keys, depending on your teammates, depending on, you know, your investment level. Eventually, you get to a point where you might not have 3 confectants at the beginning of the turn. We're still gonna have some. I think as long as you have the alt up, you'll be fine. But if for ever any reason, like I said, you don't have 3, just don't do Leaping Pursuit. Just do her normal attack like this and carry on. So let's talk about, let's rewind back to the beginning here. And let's talk about, actually, that's kind of all we need to talk about for this section. I'm going to hop over to the character screen and we're going to kind of dive into some of the more, there's 2 ways of playing her, kind of with the electric team, without the electric team, and I'm going to kind of dive into some of those nuances real quick. So, transition. So there's a couple things I really wanted to talk about for her character build and just for her overall equipment. She is a little high maintenance. She really, really wants her expansion key here. So if you don't have the neural cores just hanging around, or info cores, I mean, you should really, really consider saving them and unlocking both this key and the expansion key that comes after it. Both of these are very important to her playstyle. This key here allows her or another unit that is put on to apply conductivity, which once again turns into more confectants for her, which is very important for fueling her skills. And then this key turns her into a sub DPS unit, as well as a team-wide buffer. It gives her this a very powerful buff that applies to all electric team units, but even if you're using her outside of the electric team, you really, really want this key because of the second part here. If you do the Leaping Pursuit into Wild Extinction rotation that I kind of explained in the previous section, if you do it in that order, you will get a 100% damage boost when you do it. And you'll also get a bunch of extra attack based on how much confectants you spend. That is very important. That makes her Wild Extinction skill hit very, very hard. It's actually kind of surprising how hard it can hit. And it really turns her into like a reliable damage dealer that you can do, or that you can use to take on smaller enemies, elite enemies, and even just chunk bosses for a good chunk of damage. So it's a lot of info cores to get here, but it is very much worth it. She really wants both of these things. In addition to that, because this is tied to her alt, the Ultimate Brilliance, you really, really want some of her segments. Now, at her base form, this has an obnoxiously long cooldown, 6 turns. That means in Gunsmoke, you're using it twice. 1 at the beginning and 1 at the very, very last turn. And that means you're going to have a couple turns of like downtime on the buff. You do not want that. Enter her fortifications, specifically Fortification 1 here. This is a very, very, very strong fortification on her, because for every 3 confectants spent, you're going to reduce the cooldown of the alt by 1 turn. I will save you the thinking, and all you need to know is that with this, it will mean the rotation is Leap and Wild Pursuit, Leap and Wild Pursuit, and then you get to alt after that. So it's every 3 turns, the alt will be up, and you can use it, and you will keep 100% uptime on the buffs. And in addition to that, it'll just smooth out a lot of... It actually lets you miss a turn, but, you know, if you mess up, and for some reason your confectants gets a little wonky, it actually kind of like, you know, pads that a little bit. But long story short is every 3 turns, your alt will be up. Use the alt. That gives you 100% uptime on the buff. So with that, I'm also going to talk about her normal fixed keys real quick, because there are, as usual, a couple trap keys. For her right side, for common keys, it doesn't really matter. Once again, she is actually a solid damage dealer for single targets. So if you want to put like attack and crit and stuff, you easily can. Her own common key, Razor Sharp Claws, does really well for herself, but you can also put it on other teammates if you have it. But, you know, it's just good to like stack all these on her. But the left keys are the ones you need to worry about, because as usual, there's a couple trap keys. This one is very important. You want to put this key on. I need more power. Uh, this allows her Leaping Pursuit to do conductivity, which once again essentially gives you a small refund of confectants. This one is another good one because obviously bosses will be immune to paralysis, and even some elites are immune to paralysis, so you'll get a nice good defense ignore with this. And when we talk about the weapon, you'll see why that kind of synergizes with weapon options. But very good for this because once again, for boss units, she's actually going to be doing a not zero amount of damage contribution. And then finally, the last key is kind of up to you. I personally like this one because there's a lot of enemies that do really annoying buffs that you need to convert into debuffs. It's kind of like a purge and applying a debuff. So for other things that require that, I don't know, like for example, phase strike, things like that want debuffs or weapons, like we said, we'll talk about in a second. This is a good key to have. The other three are kind of traps. This one's horrible. Triggers one time per battle and applies paralysis in a relatively small range. Just don't use this key. It's bad. This one is also kind of bad because normally if you have a full team, you'll never have to worry about confectants, especially if it's an electric team. So this is just kind of wasted. Same thing with this one. Also kind of wasted. Like these are kind of like remnants as if you're going to play her by herself and try and, like, I don't know, solo a bunch of small mobs. You just don't need these. The short answer is you will never have confectants problems if you're running her with a competent team. So ignore these two. All three of these keys are garbage. Don't use them. So let's talk about weapon options real quick. That's the last thing I need to cover. Obviously, Phase Strike, Herb, didn't do that coming. Phase Strike, you can go with the typical attack and crit. You know, this is whatever. You guys know the drill. Weapons. So for the weapon here, weirdly enough, her signature weapon is not her best in slot. It's kind of a byproduct of the fact that when she came out, she was one of the first units that came out, so her weapon was just kind of like really underpowered for the time, and it got power crept very quickly. So her best in slot currently is Leva's weapon, weirdly enough. Just because it has such a huge attack stat on it, and it actually has a good ability that synergizes with her. Now, obviously, if you have this weapon, you probably want to be using it on Leva herself, because Leva is like the team's main damage dealer. So unless you want to get two of these, one for Leva and one for Lenna, your next best option is Farag here, and there's, like I said, a couple good reasons for it. She can use the ability here, the passive. She actually can use the support attack to provide her crit rate, but most importantly, it has another cool effect of defense ignore. Once again, this stacks with that key that I was just talking about. So these two together, once again, the number of debuffs on the target, which is great. If we take that other key that converts the enemy's buffs to debuffs, it stacks with this. So you get a big chunk of defense ignore, you get 35%. And then obviously if someone's running defense down 2, which I believe that's Jingyu and the team applies that, that's a 55% damage or defense reduction on the target. Your wild extinctions are going to hit very, very hard. So all those pieces together said kind of, it's complicated, but it's not that complicated. You don't really need to think about it too much. I'm going to go over really quickly how to use her on the full electric team. But other than that, we've covered all the important information that you're going to need. So I'm going to transition one more time, and I'll show you really quickly how to use her with other electric units. Okay, so very, very quickly here, I just wanted to cover using her in different teams, specifically the electric team. If you're using her outside of the electric team, it's just like explained earlier. It's Leaping Pursuit. If the alt is off cooldown, use it. Otherwise, use Wild Extinction. So just keep doing that. Leaping Pursuit, Wild Extinction. And she'll do just fine as a normal standalone unit. You don't necessarily need to use her in electric team. In an electric team, the only thing you need to know, I'm going to have a separate guide on this, like this full team and how it all synergizes together and what you need to worry about. But the short answer for this is, in this team combo or a similar team combo to it, you want her to go first just because... 2 reasons. You want, before everyone else starts taking all their actions and stuff, you really, really want to apply stability loss 2 to the target, because this is just going to amplify all of their attacks with more stability damage. And then obviously you want the alt up. The voltage tiles do other cool stuff, it implants weakness and all that other good stuff. But mostly it's you want the buff up. And I'm going to speed through the rest of the turn here real quick. all you need to know is that she'll be at full convectance by the time this is over. Okay, and so we're back around to the new turn. And sure enough here, we're at full convectance. We'll be able to Leaping Pursuit into Wild Extinction. And just for reference, take a look at how big this number gets. That was a little hard to see there, but it was I think 14,000-ish. So if that crits, it's big damage, big damage. So that's pretty much all you need to know about the electric team. She'll always have tons of convectance, so you don't have to worry about it. You just literally Leaping Pursuit, Wild Extinction, and rinse and repeat. So. And that pretty much covers it for this guide. Well, like I said, we'll be talking about the rest of these electric units in separate guides, and I could do like a team-wide one for them later, and like kind of how do these all synergize in different respects. So, but until we get to the next video, you guys have a great one. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment section. I'll answer them, and have a good one. Bye-bye.